Okay. The last thing, you have a news quiz coming up, which you all should be familiar with the format now. It is half news, which you can find in Slack, all the news stories. I will test on only the stories that I put in the news channel, and the other half will be your vocabulary. So the last vocabulary list I gave you, which I believe is list 4, is what you'll be quizzed on. And so your midterm did the list 1 through 3, I think, and then you have your upcoming, the most recent list that I've already posted. Any questions on that? News quiz, vocabulary, midterms, midterm grades, lecture, read chapter 9, any of those things. Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, I have a question. If this meeting in general, like, will it be shown on Slack or since
Which
it's being
this,
recorded? Yeah.
well, we're in Zoom. And are you asking, let me make sure I understand I think you're asking, is it going to be available later to view?
Yeah.
Yes,
My
yes.
fault.
So, yes, so I'm recording it. And
Okay, gotcha.
yes, and I usually just put it on my YouTube channel. So I should mention that.
Okay.
I should mention that, Ross, you recorded. But it will be, so it'll be a private link, which is what I've actually done less of that this semester, but it will be a private link on my YouTube channel only if you have the I'm gonna make it private, so if you have them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. So we have a nice strong core. So let's get into it. Well, I really am excited to have Ross Terrell here. He's an editor for a long time, but I know him basically through my twin sister is a part-time editor at Axios, who you'll meet later this semester. And this is one of her colleagues. And so when I said I would really like an editor in Axios, who would you recommend? Ross came into the conversation. She said she thought not only was he talented, but I think it'd just be great to have an African-American man's perspective in this classroom at Morehouse. So just someone that can share the ins and outs of their personal career and anything that they'd like to share. Ray, did you still have a question? Because your hand was up. I just want to make sure I got your question.
No, I didn't. My fault.
No worries. Okay. All right, great. So with that, I would like to, if you don't mind, Ross, I'll call on each of the students to say, I want you to say your name, just so you know who you're talking to, but your name, your year, so sophomore, freshman, senior, and then your major, if you don't mind. And then also, I'll throw in a fourth thing is what city you're from. So just so you get the idea, Ross, of how diverse of a group that you're speaking to. I love your locks, Ozzy. They look great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so why don't we start with Ray? Say your name, which I just said, but your name, your year, your major, and where are you from?
Okay, what's good? My name is Raymond Ragland. I'm a senior journalism major at Morehouse College, and I'm from Philly. Go Birds.
And then next on my list on my screen is Mira.
My name is Mira Donaldson. I'm a political science major, dance and choreography minor here at Spelman College, and I'm from Boston. And what else are we supposed to say?
That's it. You got it all.
Okay.
Okay. Next on my list, I see Sandro.
My name is Sandro Doriston. I am a junior computer science major, and I'm from Naples, Florida.
Thanks. And then I see Kobe.
How you doing? My name is Kobe Scales. Graduating senior at Morehouse College. I'm a journalism and communications double major from Newport News, Virginia.
And then I see Ozzy.
Good afternoon. My name is Ozzy Burcell. I'm a graduating senior, kinesiology major, journalism minor. I serve as the editor-in-chief of the Maroon Tiger. I'm the founding president of our NEBJ chapter, and right now I'm working as a breaking news reporter for the AJC.
Did you say where you're from?
Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta. Jackson.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jackson Greenleaf. I'm a junior journalism major from Prince George's County, Maryland.
Thanks. And then Aaron. Aaron, are you there?
Yes, sorry, I was having difficulty with my microphone.
Oh,
Hi, my name is Aaron Watts. I'm a junior journalism major from Ellicott City, Maryland.
thanks. And then Dylan.
How you doing? My name is Dylan Bolton. I'm a senior business administration major from Chicago, Illinois.
Bye. Okay, great. And then why don't we start the conversation off? So you all have, you will have the floor. I'll start with some questions to get us going. But I want to start with who is Ross? So why don't you tell us who you are and what company you work for and what do you do there?
Yeah, nice to hear we still got some journalism majors in the pipeline. I know the industry is a little daunting from the business side, but I'm Ross. I work for Axios, Axios Local, and I oversee 3 of our newsletters: Denver, Twin Cities, and Salt Lake City. I've worked with almost all of them, and I'm an editor here. So my day-to-day is essentially helping craft what the newsletter looks like, coming up with long-term story ideas, dealing with a lot of interpersonal team issues, brainstorming, running meetings, but no 2 days are the same. And I think that's like the beauty of it is the news, drives the conversation, and Monday could look completely different than Tuesday, but yeah, that's kind of the gist of what I do.
And I saw Ozzy's hand up. So if you have a question, give me 1 second. The only other thing I wanted to ask was, well, I have a lot of things to ask, but the next thing I want to ask is your background. Where'd you start?
Yeah, so I went to school at the University of Missouri, majored in journalism there, and got a minor in business. And then my first job out of college was a fellow at Wisconsin Public Radio. So I went the public radio track. Then I moved back to Atlanta and worked for the 2 stations there, WABE. And then one of my professors from college took a job as a news director at GPB. So I jumped ship, went over to GPB, much to the chagrin of my colleagues. Worked there for a couple years and then moved out to Salt Lake to work at KUER as the editor out here. And then in 2022, that's when I joined Axios. So I started here in, what was that, March of 22? So almost exactly 2 years.
Yeah.
And help launch a lot of our newsletters. We were still pretty nation, so help launch a lot of our newsletters back when I started.
And why don't you tell us what exactly is Axios? Some students I think know and probably some don't.
Yeah, so one of the big reasons that I did make the jump is I love public radio. I love crafting stories with audio. But consumer habits and how we intake the news is changing. And Axios is a digital first publication. We send daily newsletters in 30 cities across the country. So from San Diego to Boston, Richmond, Atlanta, Nashville, most cities have an Axios local newsletter. And the goal is to get you smarter faster. That's kind of our tagline. We use a form called Smart Brevity, where the total newsletter might have 5 stories, but it tops out around 950 words. But it's meant to be consumed on your phone in the way that people read news, which is skimming. We use a bullet point format that kind of shows you what you're getting in each section. And we kind of say like why it matters or the big picture. So like as you're skimming, you can kind of get the gist of a story without having to read, 1,200 words about one topic. And then some of our longer cities and with more subscribers, et cetera, have 8 cents a week. And that includes like a Thursday evening weekend there to help people like plan their weekend. Like here's some events going on. Here's a streaming guide. And then we have a couple weekend sends dedicated to real estate on Saturday. And then Sunday is more of kind of like the A1 feature story in the New York Times. It's more like light stuff. And then it's like these packages that we put together. But the goal is that you read our newsletter and you walk away learning something about your community that you didn't know before, or that you read like, I'm going to go share that with my friends in a group chat. And so that's what we try to keep an eye on in determining the story selection.
Very nice. Ozzy, did you have a question? I saw your hand up at one point.
It wasn't a question, but I did want to just be sure all the MT staff on the call were recognized. So Mira, Jackson, Kobe, Ray are all staff and or leaders with the Maroon Tiger. Just wanted to put that out there. That's all.
Well, why don't you share what the Maroon Tiger is for Ross?
Of
My-
course. MT, which we would call Maroon Tiger for short, the oldest organization on Morehouse campus, the oldest Black news publication, if I'm not mistaken. I know Howard likes to claim that, but it's for another conversation. But we are a newspaper, we're really fully media at the current moment. We cover news, we cover features, we cover sports. We have an opinions reporter now. We have a podcast. We have a yearly magazine that we do. We have Tiger TV, so we like to cover all bases as much as we can. Kobe is our sports editor. Raymond is one of our newest sports reporters. Mira started our podcast. Jackson is also a great sports reporter. We have a really great team behind us.
Nice. That's awesome. Love that.
So Ross, I want to get back to you and ask you, so this is a news editing and ethics class, and we start at the very basic framework of what does an editor do? I'd like to hear from you as an editor. What does an editor do every day when you hear that word? And how is that different from a reporter?
Yeah, so one, hearing you talk about AP style, I had flashbacks. We used to go through AP style quiz. It was like 100 questions, and you had to get at least a 90% to pass like the class. So AP style is real, and it'll save you a lot of time. Which I don't think if they did have the old online book, I'm not that old, but like we have the, when you have to flip through. So I had like tabs out the wazoo, just kind of like reminding myself where stuff was. So yeah, the biggest difference is reporters are obviously, as some of you know from being on paper, like out in the field. You're gathering the stories, you're collecting them, you're doing the interviews. Sometimes you're pitching the stories. I think that's advice that I always give. Like the way to make the most out of your reporting is to like pitch the stories you want to do, because you tend to tell stories better when you're passionate about them. Early on in your career, as a GA reporter, until you really have a beat, you are going to be assigned some things, and that's great. You just get to learn a lot about how to handle different news events. So that's kind of like if this was a team, reporters are kind of the players out in the field. They are the ones that people see, people get to know their bylines, their names. You can kind of write in your own style. And as an editor, I'm kind of the coach. I'm want to put you in the best position to be successful. So I'm helping sharpen story ideas. And if there's a pitch that you have, that's on me to help. Okay, what are questions that readers may have about this story? And I want to be asking those first, so that when you are reporting, you're making sure that you're answering those. And then, you're out doing the process. I'm usually here for reporters like, hey, I got this. Should we run a breaking news story now? How should we handle it? I'm helping kind of come up with like coverage priorities, the amount of space and time a story should have. And then line edits, right? Going through reading each story. I usually like to look at it, the big picture. The first edit is like, does the story make sense? Am I leaving this with any major questions or major concerns like, wait, this isn't adding up to me? And then I'm dropping in those questions first. So kind of helping provide a framework for how the story should fit. And then I'm going in and I'm doing more so like line edits, like punctuation, AP style. We have Axios style. I'm kind of looking at grammar, construction. One of my quirks is repeating words. I learned this in public radio, but I always advise like read your story out loud, because you want to be writing in a conversational way. You want it to, when people read it, you want it to read in the way that you would be telling a friend. That's something I always try to keep in mind. But when you do that, you learn how often we repeat words in the same sentence. So sometimes I'll get a sentence that I'll be like, Denver City Council wants to improve traffic in the city for city pedestrians. And it's like, we don't need to say city 3 times in this one sentence, right? Like we set the frame, we know what we're talking about. So then I'm going through making adjustments like that. Then once the story's in a place where the reader feels or the reporter feels comfortable, I feel comfortable, then it's on me to publish that story, and hopefully there are no corrections. But if there are, I'm also dealing with those, which is always a shameful moment. But that's kind of it. That's kind of like the process. And then there's the people side of if we're being honest, like reporters have a lot of egos, as they should. Like when your name is on everything that you publish, you should care about it to a level of like, this is a reflection of me. And when you put a lot of those people in the same team, sometimes there can be clashes. So I'm also working to make sure there's a good team chemistry, that the vibe is right, that we're approaching stories in a way where it's like, hey, you're on politics beat, you're on business. How can we partner and tell a better story here? So that's a little bit of insight.
Yeah, I see Mira has a question.
Yeah, so that's kind of funny because I have a tendency to repeat words too. But my question is, I neglected to mention this in my intro, but I also am a writer for the Maroon Tiger, and I also am the founder of our podcast, Tiger Talks. And so I'm very curious about how you still you're still able to merge, like how have you been able to highlight your multifacetedness as a reporter in your editing?
Yeah, I think one, you take a lot of the lessons that you learn from reporting, and that kind of drives how you edit. So one of those being like one thing I think of all the time, it's like it's much easier to get what you need the first time around. For whatever reason, people just don't pick up the phone the second time. So when I'm having the conversation with the reporter beforehand, I'm like, make sure, ask X, X, and X. Because if you come back to me and I'm like, wait, you didn't ask this, and then it's like, oh, well, now I need to go get that. The process just gets so much longer. You may not get them. So I take a lot of things that I learned as a reporter and use them when I'm editing. I also use that to help build trust. Like I still do some reporting now and then. If there's a story that jumps out to me, I'll still go and like write it. But showing reporters like, look, I'm not asking you to do anything that I haven't done that I wouldn't do. Like I'm still doing it. So if I'm like, hey, let's go to this press conference, or hey, we should cover this meeting. I'm telling you that from experience. And then freelancing and journalism was like huge. So I still try to find opportunities. Like I said, I love editing audio, right? So I freelance, edited podcasts. I have, other just friends or colleagues in the business who sometimes want second eyes on things. So you can always find opportunities to keep certain skill sets sharp. And if you find like, oh man, I'm getting, I'm deep in the audio, I really want to work more on my writing, freelance some stories, pitch some stories to Atlanta Magazine, to different publications that you read. And that way you can get, sharpen your writing skills. You can learn a new format. You can build those connections within the industry. So it's a lot about just kind of like hustling in that way of like finding opportunities to do or tell the stories you want to tell, and then creating a pathway to do that.
Well, speaking of creating and telling stories, I'd be curious to know if you could share what skill sets, hard, soft, technical, that you would recommend that this group acquire in order to be able to edit good stories.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing is curiosity. Like always be curious. Always be asking questions. And be cynical in that curiosity, right? Sometimes you'll get a quote and it sounds great and you're like, oh, yes. And then you'll have a moment, I'm like, but really? Like that sounds a little too good to be true, right? And again,
Yes.
going back to the thing,
Are you like our stuff?
Dylan, I think you're unmuted.
I just go ahead.
Oh, awesome. Always be cynical too, so when you do get that in the moment, you can push back and like, wait a minute, you're saying this is, and a lot of times people are like, well, hold on, I'll get you the more accurate information. But it'll also help you find stories that you weren't necessarily looking for. I wouldn't call this a regret, but like I learned this lesson once I was covering NCAA, the championship game. It was UGA Bama when it was in Atlanta. So like 2017, 18, around then. And in between the third and fourth quarter, Alabama was losing and they played Sweet Home Alabama. And the Alabama side of the crowd just went absolutely raucous. And I was sitting there like, man, that just changed the game. That changed momentum. Bama goes on to win. And I get back to my desk. It's like, midnight, 1 a.m. I'm telling my editor, I'm like, yeah, there was this moment. And he's like, did you record it? And I was like, no, I didn't think of that. And he's like, that's the nugget to your story that nobody else got to see. Like if you were watching on TV, nobody else reported that, right? And like that was a chance where it's like, man, if I was curious, I could have had something that was unique that really elevated the story. Um, I'd say other skills, conversationalists, like always be willing to talk to people. You get some of your best stories while you're covering something else. So I always try to find people who attend press conferences or who are residents or neighbors, people who show up and just ask them like, hey, what's going on in your world, right? Like, it doesn't always have to be some major scoop or some salacious story, but just helping you tap in and build a network of sourcing of like, oh, cool, can I get your number, your information? I always think if you leave any event with either a story or a source, it was successful. Also, attention to detail is huge. It's 2024, and in a post-Trump presidency, people love discrediting the media. So anytime they find one thing wrong with the story, they're quick to, I'm unsubscribing, this is fake, et cetera, et cetera. So you got to have attention to detail in that sense. Like our credibility is the one thing that we can stand on. And I think what separates us from Twitter journalists or TikTok is that we go through such a rigorous fact-checking process. So attention to detail, curiosity, conversationalist, being cynical, and then just being willing to like be a team player. I think there's so many times where we can do great stories if we're able to just kind of work together and like merge beats or merge ideas or brainstorm. But always like kind of approach things like this could be a story and how would I tell it? And if I can't tell it, is there somebody else that I know that could, and I'm willing to pitch that and work with them. I think that's like the best start.
Wonderful. And so you talk about being a team player and coaching and things like that. So how important is feedback to the editing process?
Oh, that's the entire thing. And like that, I didn't realize this, I think, when I was, first out of college, but learning how to not take things personally, I think is huge. And it's hard because whenever you have a craft like journalism or art, or whether it's podcasting, music, writing, right, you're putting like yourself into this piece. You're putting your creative energy, your time, your effort into it. And then having someone come along and tell you what doesn't work or what doesn't make sense, or you may have to redo it, like that's hard to hear. Because you're like, man, I just put time in getting these interviews. I thought this was great. I wrote it how I thought it would read. So you really have to learn how to separate the process from the personal side and realize your editors and the reporters on the same page. We want the best story, right? Like I want the story that readers are going to be able to understand. That's going to make them come back to us. That's going to make us invaluable in their day-to-day life. I'm not, editing stories just to make you feel bad or just like, oh, this sucked, rewrite it, right? If something doesn't make sense to me, chances are it's probably not going to make sense to readers. So learning not to take feedback personally, but then also learning how to deliver it. And like, I think that's a side that I learned in reporting of how personal it could feel. And so now when I edit, I try to keep that in mind of like giving feedback in a respectful way. A lot of positive reinforcement goes much further than, I had editors in the past that would open a story and just shred it, send me back to my desk and like, go rewrite that. And I'm like, sheesh, like I need a break here. And I try to look at it as like, hey, complimenting pieces that like, hey, I really love this lead, or like, this is a great quote, or if there's a setup to something that I'm like, that's really clever. Like, I love that. If there's pieces that aren't working, I try to reframe it like, okay, how do we build around what did work? Like, you have the pieces there, maybe we just rearrange them and reorganize the puzzle. And making sure it's collaborative. I always want the reporters to feel like they have input in this too. There are times where I sometimes do have to come in and big dog and it's like, no, like this is not a story, or like we're not writing this. But most of the time I want it to be collaborative. Like, do you feel good with the story? After the edits are in, it's rewritten, whatever the case is, do you still feel like this is a story that you're proud of and that you want to share? If the answer is yes, then I think we've done something good.
Mm-hmm. I remember the first story that I had air on CNN that I didn't even recognize it, but I wasn't confident enough to say what you just said. I'm not sure that I feel comfortable. I've learned since then. I have very much learned it. It doesn't go out unless I feel comfortable. But and figuring out also how to just both of us make it the best story it can be. But I feel like almost like you have to go through that experience to learn how to work with someone. so
Right.
that you can be
And
comfortable.
sometimes, you know, I make bad edits and I'll ask her, and I'm like, no, that's not quite what I'm trying to say. And I'm like, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. But a lot of times the answer is between what they wrote and what I'm editing. And like there's a middle ground. And when you get there, you know it. It's like, yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly what I was trying to say. Or a lot of times too, just pulling them off the page. And you'll get these complicated, and I'm like, okay, forget about writing it. Just tell it to me, right? Just tell me what you're trying to say. And most of the time they'll say it. And I'm like, that's it. You just said it. Write literally what you just told me, or I'll just write it down. Like, that's a sentence. And that's another great exercise. It's like whenever you find yourself, I live in reading your story back, when you find yourself struggling, like call a friend or act like you're on a phone call and just say like what you're trying to. And most of the time, like it'll come out in the way that you should write it.
And we talked a little bit about this earlier in the semester, but it's just about getting confidence as an editor. So how do you build confidence? Because you are sharing your point of view and your thoughts and even corrections that you want people to make. How do you feel confident about giving that kind of guidance?
Yeah, I think repetition. You know, at KUER, I think I was older than most people, or like kind of around the same age, and here I'm like younger than most people. And so there's definitely that bit of it of like, man, I'm editing people who have been, you know, covering their city for 15, 20 years, right? Who, you know, are experts about a lot of it. So I think one, you have to have the confidence in yourself that like, I get it, you're a great reporter and you know what you're doing, but like I know what I'm doing as well. I always say like a little bit of confidence or ego or no, a little bit of arrogance, it can go a long way, like just a spritz of it. But being aware like I belong in this room with you as well. Like I'm also a good editor. I also know what makes a good story. I also know how to tell a good story. And if those components are missing, like I'm going to call that out. Trainings are great too, finding trainings, whether it's at Pointer or different fellowships. But just being in a room with other more experienced people teaches you a lot. And I think that's one of the biggest drawbacks from like the remote work is like I learned so much from just being around other reporters who were better than I was when I was like just starting. And like you would just hear how they ask questions, you would see their process, you would hear the way they went through edits. I'm like, oh, I didn't even think of that as a skill. And then another thing I like to do is like, I like to edit other work that's already been published from bigger publications. So if I'm reading ESPN, sometimes I'm like, I wouldn't have written it this way, right? Like, just maybe I don't like write that down, but in my head, I'm going through like, how would I have told this story? Or what would I have liked to see more of? Just so that you kind of really build that muscle of like reading stories with a critical eye. And then the more you do it and asking reporters for feedback, I like to hear from them as well. I'm like, I don't want this to always be me telling you how you should have written this differently or what you should have done. Like, tell me, like, if you think I made a mistake or if you think I missed something, like, let me know as well, so that I can get better. And then if I'm getting better and you are as well, the entire product is.
Nice. I love the collaborative spirit. Mira, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. So going back on your last point that you made, where you were speaking about how you value like your writers coming or your people that have done the stories to go back to you. My question is, what is your advice for a writer or a reporter that like hasn't like who has an editor that's not as receptive to working with you? And like, yeah, that's my question.
Yeah. I have been in that position. I had okay, there we go. Not you know, kind of like, was she emotionally abusive? That's up to the jury, but she was brutal. Like, and she was the type that I would be like, hey, I'm ready for an edit. And she would open the story, look at him like, nope. And I'm like, okay. So I go back to my desk and I try to rewrite it, and I would come back. She was like, nah, that's not it. And I'm like, give me some direction. Like, clearly I'm not getting what you're hoping that I get. But what saved me in that is my colleagues. They were like, hey, let us talk, right? Like we'll go through it. So I think peer editing is also great. Like when you're in a team and there's reporters like, hey, can I run the story by you? Or if you know that your editor is a little, you know, tricky or it's like one day they may be great, the other day it may be like horrific. Finding either mentors, finding people that you trust, finding other people in the newsroom to maybe give you a first pass or to bounce some of those questions off. And then that way you're kind of going into it with a little more cushion. And if you get something and you're confused, I try to find other people who have also been in these experiences. Like, hey, this is what they're asking me for. I don't know how to find that, or like this isn't making sense. But really having a network of people that you trust, that you know you can go to when your editor may not be collaborative or they may be just like kind of vicious. That was huge for me. And then those turned into friendships. And now when I have questions, I still go back to them like, yo, let's brainstorm about this. Or like, how would you, can you give me a gut check about this decision I'm making? And that's, I would say, is huge.
Great answer. Ray? Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes. So earlier I remember you said that you should try to not take things personally because everyone wants the best story. But I wanted to ask if you think there's been times where your race has played a role in getting your stories delayed or changed.
Yeah, I think when I first started in public radio, that wasn't necessarily the story itself, but it was more so the production. Like I struggled so hard with voicing. And every time I would go voice a story, it would be like, no, you're not saying this word right. Or like, no, you're ending it this way and it should be this inflection. And you need voice coaching. And then, the editor would come into the booth with me and just like, no, this is how it's supposed to sound. And I would get so frustrated because I'm like, public radio is, predominantly white. You want me to sound like a mainstream, Steve Inskeep white person on radio. I'm like, I'm never going to sound like that. So that was something that, I really had to find my comfort zone with like, okay, I can accept the coaching and I can accept the feedback, but understanding like, I'm never going to sound how you want me to. And like, I'm going to be different. I'm going to have a slang. And right, like I'm not gonna just rumble through words where it's like, wait, you didn't breathe, you didn't pause, like that's just a run-on sentence. But I'm also not gonna sound like the traditional NPR voice. And I think you hear that with what's her name, Aisha Roscoe. I may be mispronouncing that. But it's something that I think she also started with, and like a lot of listeners would complain about like how she sounded on air, and learning just how to be comfortable like in yourself. Which what I did take from that was like, okay, I think the key to this is like now I need to work on my writing, right? Like I need to write in a conversational way or in a way that I would actually just tell the story to my friends, because then that would take the thinking out of the voicing for me. And that's something I'm like, I can't control that, right? Instead of sounding like I'm reading, I can sound like I'm just talking. So I went back and was like, what about this can I control? And then also having a conversation with, editors of like, hey, I learned like there are certain words I just hate saying. Rural is one of them. Or like brewery. I hate it when those were in stories. So then I found like, okay, how do I make sure like those aren't in stories? So I think that was a really big like growth moment for me. And like it wasn't easy. I mean, there were a lot of times I'm like, maybe this just is not, the platform, it's not the medium for me. But then I would lean back and I'm like, no, but I'm a good journalist and I can tell good stories and I'm getting all the pieces there. I'm getting great quotes. I'm getting the nat sound. I'm constructing like this auditory device to really like bring you in. I just have to, learn how to write a script in a way that I feel comfortable. So I'm not thinking, so I'm not reading, so I can go in the booth and just be free when I'm voicing this. But I would say, if anything, race has helped me pitch stories and that a lot of people may have missed. And when I was at GPB, we used to do packages and we did like a music one. And I was like, oh yeah, Jimmy Carter this and music that. And I'm like, well, what about like the impact of Negro spirituals on the music scene today, right? That's something that nobody else is probably going to tell that story. So I try to approach everything with that dual lens, and it also helps me catch a lot, right? Like when we have stories, unfortunately, still about police violence, et cetera, and a line may get in there that's like, no, that's not right. Like we're not going to say this line. Another publication might, but I know too much and have experienced too much for us to run a line, that's as glib as this. So that's probably like the biggest role. It's just the stories I pitch and the way that I may look at a story. Like, a white colleague may hear a quote and be like, oh man, that's great. And I may hear them like, that's extremely problematic. And we need to be reporting about why they said that. And that has helped kind of like separate some of my stories, like my edits apart.
Nice. That's a wonderful answer. Thank you for the
Thank you.
what other questions do you have? So we actually are going to end a little bit early today just because I have a meeting. So we have about 15 minutes left. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them. I did want to ask you, Ross, about leadership. You talked about coaching and collaborating. That sounds like a leader to me. So how much do you lean into leadership skills as an editor?
If I had to put a percentage on it, I would say, let's go 65-35. Like, I have this idea that anything can be communicated as long as it's respectful, right? And so there are a lot of tough conversations, and there are times where you have to shut down stories. There are times where, you know, you have to, like I have a team I work with, and every now and then they just get off, and there's like these little spats between them, and it's like, okay, let's have a conversation. Like, forget the journalism part. What's going on here? And I think you do have to be a people person in that sense. So you're able to pick up on like weird mood shifts. So like, wait, you know, you're coming to this meeting, and now the past couple of days when I'm like, yo, good morning, how's it going? You're just like, I'm fine. And I was like, okay, something's going on there. And also like having the confidence to start and have the tough conversation, and knowing that like where you have to be assured of where you're coming from. And like there are times where I would love to go back at it with a reporter, right, who's just like pissed about something, or they're just giving attitude, and I'm like, but I'm the leader here. I can't afford to stoop to that level. I can't afford to be moody each and every day, right? Like my team has to trust that, like, okay, we know what we're getting from him when he shows up to the meetings, when he's asking us to do something, when he's giving us advice. Like we know it's going to typically be the same person every day, right? And I think that consistency is huge. So I'd say most of it is about leading, is about inspiring. Like journalism is a creative industry, and if people are upset or frustrated, like they don't want to work with the team, they don't want to work with you, then like you start to see the stories decline. So you have to be inspirational. You have to be a people person, be able to pick up on certain things. You have to be willing to have tough conversations, like call people out on their BS when you see it's like affecting production. And then you have to be, you know, you can't, whoever, like a top reporter, somebody may be older than you, may make more money, whatever the case is, you can't let that prevent you from also holding them accountable. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's like, we hear in sports all the time, right? Like coaching the superstar hard also sets kind of this level for the team of like, they're not above reproach, and none of y'all are, right? So I try to have that mindset as well. It's like giving praise, inspiring, having the tough conversations, and then being someone that they can trust, like being someone that people can come to and like, hey, this is going on either in my personal life or at work, and I'm really struggling, I need advice. That just helps build more of that trust and rapport, which I think in the long run, you have a better journalist.
So we have a lot of seniors in this class, as you may have picked up. So that means job seeking time or internships, or however you decide to expand your career. So my question is how do you stand out for that job, for that editor job?
Biggest thing I will say is nothing matters more in journalism than experience. Like I have seen people, you can have a great resume, you can have a, you know, great GPA, or sorry, not great resume. You have a great GPA, you know, you can be in all the clubs, but like, I'm looking for clips. Show me that you have done this before, right? And I would much rather have someone that's had, you know, internships, that's had bylines, that have stuff they can show, than someone's like, oh, I have a master's degree. That's great. That means you can take tests really well. But this person's actually covered press conferences, and they've actually written stories, and they know what the process is like. And so that's the biggest thing I think is really like building a portfolio, because that's what we're looking for. Like, can you do the job? And if you can show me like, hey, I've experienced doing it, that automatically gives you a leg up. I think the other thing is your cover letter is so important, especially in journalism. How can you get a job editing or telling stories if you can't tell me a story, right? So the one piece of advice I was like, don't use your cover letter to just say like, I'm Ross. I really want this job. I went to school here. I did this thing. Tell me a story. Like, show me, as we say, like, show, don't tell. Like, show me your skill sets in that cover letter. Like, I try to start with personal experience, or my first couple of jobs, I would kind of start when I was in high school, editing the school paper, and how I made the decision that I wanted to get into this, right? And then I'm showing you I can write a strong lead, I can have a good character, I can rope you in, I can deliver facts, I can use a quote. I know how to tell like a long story in a succinct format. Those are the ones that automatically, if I get a good cover letter and I can see clips, I'm like, yeah, we need to move this person on to the next round. I think that is probably the biggest thing that will separate you from just like the words of just like resumes and like, oh, my GPA is this and I was in this club, etc. But like, demonstrate the skills for the job that you're trying to get hired for.
Nice. So I want to talk about tech stack, right? Technology changes all the time. So I'm sure a couple of years from now, there will be some other communication system infiltrating our newsrooms. But I do think it's good to get in the habit of learning tech and continuously being willing to change with technology. But what are some of the applications or systems that you use in the newsroom?
Yeah, Slack is huge. I work with to that point about, adapting. There are some people who just don't understand Slack and they don't really care to, and they're like, oh, I'll just call you. I'm like, that's great. It has its place. Sometimes it is easier to hop on the call. But it's not always convenient. Sometimes I need to get a quick message out. So Slack, just learning like Slack etiquette, how people react to different emojis, or you've seen the whole thing about like the yellow thumb, is that passive aggressive, whether it is or isn't, like just being aware that some people could feel that way is key. Google Drive is huge. Obviously, like email is the most consistent form of communication. Like out of all the changes, email is still here. And then we use a CMS called Eden. But essentially, any newsroom is going to have a different CMS, and
Let me
spending
stop here. Why don't you explain what CMS is?
Oh, yes. That's content management system. So it can be WordPress, it can be Eden, it can be NewsBoss. They kind of vary across the board. And that's the interface that you put your story in on the back end and it gets published like to the website. But the more comfortable you are with like your organization CMS, the much easier the process will be when it comes to building stories. Some are complicated. The one we use is like pretty straightforward. Biggest thing on the tech side, though, is learning SEO, search engine optimization. That is the key to getting eyes on your story, right? And like you can write an amazing story, but if no one sees it, then it's kind of like, what's the point? So learning how to really like optimize your stories for Google, for search, because social is dying in the way that it used to drive traffic to news sites. Like Facebook is out of the news business, so is X. TikTok doesn't really have a great interface. Instagram, we still see some wins there, but it's tricky. So learning how to really get your story at the top of Google, whether that's Apple News, whether it's in other newsletters that kind of aggregate content and share it, that's huge. And then analytics, we use a site called Parsley that shows like page views and how long someone's been on the page and like where people are coming from. Is it search? Is it direct link? Is it the website? Those numbers, learning what they mean and how you can kind of like influence them are key because people look at traffic, and traffic drives revenue, because the more people seeing your story, the more advertisers are willing to pay to advertise on the page. More revenue means more consistent paychecks, right? So whether that's Google Analytics, Parsley, I would start just like dabbling around and seeing like how Google Trends works and seeing like how you can really use your story to hop in on a national conversation and drive those page views.
Wonderful. And our class is on Slack, so I'm glad to hear that was the first thing.
Oh, perfect.
So I have one more question, then I'll open it up for everyone else if they have other questions. But just some newsrooms or even journalists that you admire, you think do quality work that we should be paying attention to learn from?
Yeah. Other than Axios, I recommend Axios just because of the format. Like it's different, and learning how to write in different formats is great. Public radio, WBEZ is great. I'm subscribed to their newsletter. They're the station in Chicago. They just do really great projects. I on the sports, I love reading The Athletic. Their stories tend to be like a little longer, but I love the behind the scenes that they're able to get and the sourcing and how they're able to use that. New York Times obviously is a staple. Their ability to just break news and consistently be accurate about it, and how they write their stories is fantastic. The Atlantic is also another good one, just for like storytelling. Tend to have more feature stories, but I really enjoy those as well. I'll admit I'm not the biggest podcast listener, but obviously you have like the daily, just good vehicles like this is how you sum up news in a quick and succinct format. And I think those are the big ones. I check local papers, support local news. Like it's dying, and I think it's the most crucial. So I try to read like the AJC, Salt Lake Tribune, the Star Tribune of Minneapolis, the Denver Post, any local paper that I can find and support. I would also recommend that as well.
Right. It's almost hard for me to say this out loud, but until I became a local news editor, I didn't realize how important local news was to the fabric of a community being informed and making decisions for itself. So
100%.
yeah, I doubled down on that. And that's part of the reason why I like Axios as well, because even though it has large national reach, it does focus on individual communities. So I admire the work that you all do.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So I haven't heard from a few folks. I haven't heard from Jackson, Kobe, Sandra, Dylan, Harrison. Do any of you have questions? Ozzy does. Go for it.
So I know we spoke a little bit earlier, and I'm sorry if I missed what I'm about to ask. My phone is loud. But it's about navigating newsroom leadership, knowing when you're ready for that editor position. So I'm an individual. My end goal is to be an editor-in-chief of a major publication one day. How do you make it known, hey, I'm ready to step up in this newsroom? How do you go about that?
Yeah. Journalism is unfortunately still one of those industries where you really, you do have to climb the ladder. And a lot of times it's like sheer experience. But few things. One, networking is huge. That is like the key, I think, to this industry is really not what you know. Well, that matters, but like who you know. So networking. And then finding opportunities like wherever you are. So like when I was a reporter, I would be talking to my boss, like, hey, I'm interested in editing. Are there times when I can go shadow one of the editors? Can I spend a day learning the back end of like how we're publishing stories? If so-and-so is going to be out, can I edit the stories this day? And then that way I'm like building that new muscle, I'm building the repetition, I'm building the clips. So when I am applying for an editor job, I'm like, oh, hey, here's some links to stories that I've edited. Now I know about the process. Fellowships are huge as well. There are quite a few good ones out there, like Pointer's a really good editor one. Learning how to report on different topics, on like the key steps. There's a lot of free trainings as well, like good checklists of like what you should look for as an editor. Like here's what you do in the first pass, second one, etc. And then once I've done it enough, I look internally like, hey, is there going to be a new job posting? Like keeping track and tabs on that. But really like, again, back to the show, not tell, like demonstrating your skill set and your eagerness. But like the best advice I could give is like advocate for yourself. If you go into an organization and you may be a GA reporter, but your goal is to be an editor, make that known. Like, I'm not trying to just do this forever. And then that way that person can find opportunities for you. Like, hey, actually we have an intern. Like I would always offer to edit the intern because I'm like, this is great. Now I can demonstrate that I can lead someone, I can help craft stories, I can edit stories. And now it's like, oh wait, now we have a full-time editor position. Well, Ross has been doing it with the intern. Why don't we give him a shot? Or if a producer is out, I'm like, hey, can I take that over? Can I shadow them for a day? And like, maybe I don't report as much today, but I'm learning this new skill. And then get your applications out. I think too many times people apply for jobs like you see, it's like, I haven't been doing this for 7 years. I'm not going to apply. Just apply anyway, right? The worst they can say is no, but if anything, pipelines are huge, and we're always looking to keep pipelines filled. And so sometimes we see an resume application. It's like, wait, this may not be the job, but keep them in mind. Like we will definitely, and we have gone back to people like, hey, you applied for this job a few months ago. Are you still interested? We have a different position that may work. So advocate for yourself. Hustle as much as you can when you're in the newsroom. Find people to shadow, find people to network with, and then try to create opportunities for yourself within that, and like make it known what your goals and your priorities are.
Thank you. I think Ozzy's already doing that with this conversation. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we are out of time. I'm gonna have to leave a little bit early, but I do want to thank you, Ross, just for your transparency and honestly your energy. It's got me. I feel like I'm starting all over again. Like I'm excited about journalism. So hopefully you'll come back. I'll be bugging you, but I want to.
Yeah. I will drop my email in the chat. So if you guys ever have questions or want to reach out and you want me to look over a cover letter or resume or see if I know someone anywhere, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm on Twitter. I think it's like Ross, or Twitter X, Ross Terrell 7. So send me a message there. But yeah, if I can be a resource to you guys for anything, definitely let me know.
Wonderful. I'll also share this in Slack. It's interesting because it's X, but we still have to type in twitter.com.
No.
Anyway.
Elon.
Yes. Anyway, so thank you so much for your time. And if anyone has any questions for Ross, you said feel free to reach him out via X or that email. And you all process what you heard today. Think about further questions that you have. And I look forward to your write-up. I'll give you details on the deadline for that and how long it should be very soon. Everyone have a good day.
Awesome. See y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.